Let's go over the control group. I'm going to break this into 3 videos because there are 3 different kinds of controls here. We have the range controls, the clock controls, and then the note map controls. So for this first video, I'm going to focus on these range controls. First thing that I want to point out is the module name is reflected here as well. So if you choose a different module name, like Arpeggio, then in the control tab, you're going to notice that it's renamed Arpeggio. I have some chords set up to help demonstrate what this force range parameter does. Much like what it's called, it forces the range of notes. Almost always, well, always, it will make the range compressed in some way. So let's start off by listening to this first pad. It's an A minor chord. I'm actually just going to play it so 3 notes play. And then I have the same chord, except the 5th is raised up 1 octave. And if you notice here on the display, we can see how the notes are kind of spread out. In the first pad, they're 3 in a row. In the second pad, we have that octave higher. So now, if I turn on the lowest, it's going to make all of the notes no further than 12 semitones away from the lowest note in the chord that I play. So the lowest note here is this A, and then this E5 is more than 12 semitones away from this A. By the way, I have this displayed in such a way where the notes are sorted, so they start at the highest note and then incrementally go to the lowest note. I could sort them so it starts at the lowest note and then shows the highest from there, but I think it makes more sense to sort them going down, because then at the bottom of the display is the lowest note, and that's just the most intuitive to me. Anyway, with the lowest setting in force range, it's going to make this E drop an octave, so that way it's not more than 12 semitones away from the lowest note in the chord anymore. And effectively, it's going to make this E5 sound just like this E4. So when I hit the pad, and then that sounds just like this pad. Of course, this pad is also obeying this law, but since nothing is more than 12 semitones away from the bottom note, then there's no change. In this last pad, I have the 3rd and 5th of this chord, of this A minor chord, transposed 1 octave away from the lowest note, being an A, the bass note as it's called. And just as you can imagine, it's going to drag these 2 notes down an octave in order to make them less than 12 semitones away from the bass note. And if I were to take this parameter off, see those upper notes are an octave. So basically, it works with 1 note, it works with 2 notes, it'll work with any number of notes in a chord, it'll just always drag them down to whatever the lowest note is. And that is technically independent of whatever chord you're playing. It just wants to make sure that the lowest note is going to go, is going to make everything within an octave of that lowest note. Later on, the chord you play will come into in effect when it comes to this root position, which is actually already on. I'll just take it off for now. There will be no change since all these chords were already in root position. But anyway, I'll talk more about that when we get there. Continuing on, we have highest, which is going to be exactly how you think. It's going to make it so all the notes in a chord are within 12 semitones from the highest note. So this E4 up here is the highest. All of these are already within a range of 12 semitones from the highest, so I guess I could just show you what this pad sounds like by itself. The next chord, I have that A dropped an octave, and then the next one I have the A and the 3rd dropped an octave. But then if I put the priority on highest for this second pad here, or chord pad 6, it'll make that A an octave higher, so it'll be A3 instead, which would sound just like this. And this is going to sound exactly the same. It's going to drag that A up an octave and the C up an octave. As you probably understand by now, it's only transposing notes an octave, so it's not actually changing the notes in the chord. It's just making sure that those notes are within 12 semitones or are in the same, are within an octave range from the highest or lowest note. The next parameter is probably the trickiest one to understand. It's the only one that uses this force range wrap parameter, and I'll explain what this does in a second, but first I'm going to explain the other parts of this. So it has this compress to 1 octave. So basically, if the notes are spread out, if you have a really open voiced chord, then it's going to compress those down into 1 octave, and then it's going to put that in the 4th octave range of the keyboard. So when I say 4th octave range, I'm talking about from C3 to B3. If we call this the 1st octave, this would be the 2nd, 3rd, and then the 4th would be the C3 to B3 range. It's a little wacky that Stephen decided to call it that, because technically there is a -1 octave, C-1, which, extends down, but it's fine. Whatever octave you want to call it, doesn't really matter. The point is that it will snap to this octave. And then there is another detail that I'll get into in a second. So anyway, we're compressing the notes into a 1 octave range, and that 1 octave is going to be in that 4th octave, or C3 to B3 range. And then we maintain the inversion of the chord. So in these chord pads, I have a second inversion, so the E is on the bottom, so our ACE is actually starting on it's E, EAC, so second inversion. So that's this bass E, just standard notation. So when I hit a pad, this is let's just see what it sounds like originally. So it starts on, and this happens to already be in the 3rd octave, so it's not really any shift. This one is an octave higher. So you'll see when I put this on, it's going to drag it down to that 3rd octave. Oh, but I have the range wrap. Sorry about that. So now that sounds, well, you kind of already got a preview of what we're going to talk about in a second. But so now this pad, which was an octave higher, and this one's an octave lower from C3 to B3. You'll notice that this goes beyond B3, and that's because when it drags it down to that octave, it's dragging it so the bass note is within that 3rd octave. So the other notes can be outside of the octave, and then that's where this force range wrap parameter comes into effect. So the lowest note is E, and this is playing at E3, which is in that C3 to B3 range. But if I wanted it so that the force range wrap parameter is on D sharp, which is right below E, it'll drop everything down 1 octave. So then the other notes, the notes that are above that, will reach up into that C3 to B3 range. So it'll sound then an octave lower. There is one thing that kind of threw me for a loop when I was recording this video earlier. If I were to put on root position, this parameter, by the way, works independently of the force range parameter. If I put it in root position, it actually drops the upper 2 notes down an octave. So we are in root position. So we were in the second, what do I want to say, transposition, inversion. But by dropping it down to root position, it actually drops this this A down below A2. So if we drop everything down an octave to get into that C3 range, it would then be the same notes as this. But then if we're in root position, this A3, which was transposed up to get to second transposition, to get to second inversion, this drops back down to A2. But A2 is below the range of the okay, wait. Okay, it just confused myself. So hold on. Let me just check this out real fast. So if I have this in root position and then I play this, oh, because of the wrap parameter. Oh my gosh, so confusing. Basically, yeah, I I drop it down to that third octave, but then I have it wrapped around so it goes to the second octave, but then I have it in root position so it goes down to the first octave, which is this A now since it's below C2 and this GE doesn't allow things below C2, it reflects it back up. So it's just a real weird anomaly that occurred that I was like, why is that? But anyway, you don't have to really worry too much about these kind of details, but it's still nice to know why they occur, why they happen. So yeah, sorry if that is confusing. It is very confusing, but you know, whatever. So the other thing that I want to demonstrate is that that it does, of course, maintain the inversion of the chord. So if root position is off, then we will always start on an E, whether we're starting off on E2 or E3, depending on where the wrap parameter decides to drop the incoming notes an octave. And then I guess this last chord is really just to demonstrate a really wide voiced chord. You can see this is, let me just turn this off so you can hear this. And then if I were to turn this on, it drops everything into that. I'll have to go back up to E. It drops everything into that octave 4 range, or C3. I'm just going to call it octave 3. And then if I put the wrap parameter on D sharp, it'll drop it an octave below that. Cool. So hopefully that all makes sense. Of course, feel free to ask me questions and I'll explain them if anything is cloudy. So the last one is this. It does the same thing as this one, except it forces everything into the 4th octave, no matter what, which can change the inversion. So in my last group of pads, I demonstrate that. I have this one on the, well, actually, let's not pay attention. Let's just pay attention to this one for now. So it's A2, C3, E3. Let's hear what that sounds like plain. And then I believe this will sound this. No, so this will sound different. This will start sounding on E, since it's going to make this A up an octave because it's going to force all of the notes into that C3 to B3 range, no matter what. So let's see, that would be E, A, C. No, it would be. Let's see. Yeah, I got it right. Nope. Oh, C, yeah, C, E, A. There we go. So we're starting on C, my bad. So we're starting on C, and then the A is reflected up to A3. So it goes C3, E3, A3. So yeah, everything is just forced into that C3 to B3 range, which can, of course, change the inversion of the chord. This one is already on the second inversion, but I believe it will sound the exact same since it's all in that C3 to E3 range, C3 to B3 range. It will actually sound the exact same. No change at all. And then this one's a really wide voice chord. This will show you that this will compress all the notes. And then in root position, let's see, actually, does root position override this? Let's find out. Yep, it does. So root position, no matter what, will override this. So where this would change the inversion of the chord, like where we would be starting on C, this will force the A back down to the bottom. But with that off. And then, of course, just to demonstrate that this parameter works independently of the force range parameter, we could play this. So this is C3, E3, A3. Yep. Cool. That is almost everything. The very last thing that you need to know is that let's say that this is forcing it down to this C3 to B3 range. We don't have to necessarily have the notes staying in that octave. We can go back to our GE setup tab, and then we could like transpose it up or down an octave. So if I were to go to 12 semitones, we're up 1 octave, and then if I were to hit a pad. Also note that this is only controlling the notes that are actually going into the GE, and it's not affecting what the GE is doing with that afterwards. So you can see the note series is really long, and of course when I get into the GE parameters, I'll get into like what a note series is and how it's generated and all that stuff. But just know that the force range parameter is not keeping things necessarily like in that range for good. It's only keeping things in that range when they're entered into the GE. Obviously, the arpeggiator can make things climb a lot higher than the C3 to B3 range. Cool, so that's absolutely everything. In the next video, I'll go over the clock parameters. And yeah, ask me any questions if something didn't make sense. Take care.